The streets of downtown Chicago were always busy, filled with honking cars, rushing footsteps, and the constant chatter of people moving about their lives. Among the chaos, a young girl named Emily Carter stood quietly at the corner of Maple Street. Her small basket of wildflowers, and a few collected glass bottles were all she had to sell. Every morning before the sun fully rose, she would walk miles to gather them. By the time the city awoke, she was already standing in her spot, ready to face another long day. Emily was only 19, but life had already weighed heavily on her. Her father, once a hard-working construction worker, had suffered a stroke 2 years earlier. He could no longer walk, his speech broken into fragments. Her mother, frail and weakened by arthritis, spent most of her days in bed, unable to move without help. Emily had become the caretaker of them both, her young shoulders carrying responsibilities most adults would find unbearable. She never complained. To her, selling flowers and bottles was not just survival, it was love. Every coin she earned went directly toward food, medicine, and keeping their tiny apartment warm. At night, she would gently feed her father soup, help her mother with her hands, and whisper, "We'll be okay, I promise." Most people passed her by without a glance. To them, she was just another poor girl on the streets. But there was one man who noticed, every single day. His name was Daniel Hayes, a 24-year-old business graduate working in his father's successful real estate company. Daniel drove past Maple Street every morning on his way to the office. And every morning, his eyes would find Emily. At first, he told himself it was curiosity, why such a young girl was standing there selling flowers, instead of being in college or enjoying life. But as days turned into weeks, he realized it was something deeper. Her determination, the way she stood tall despite her worn-out clothes, and the quiet strength in her eyes. It all stirred something in him. One morning, Daniel finally stopped his sleek black car by the curb. Emily looked up, surprised, clutching her basket a little tighter. He stepped out, his suit crisp, his shoes shining, a clear contrast to her faded dress. For a moment, she felt small under his gaze, but then she straightened her back, meeting his eyes with quiet dignity. "Good morning," Daniel said with a warm smile. "How much for the flowers?" Emily hesitated, then whispered, $2 a bunch. Daniel handed her a $10 bill. "Keep the change," he said softly, taking the flowers. Emily blinked, her lips parting slightly. She wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. He simply nodded and returned to his car, leaving her with more money than she usually made in an entire day. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a strange spark of hope. And Daniel, as he drove away, knew this was just the beginning. The following morning, Emily returned to her corner with the same basket, though this time it felt a little lighter in her hands. She had used part of the money Daniel gave her to buy extra medicine for her father. It was the first night in months that he had slept peacefully. Her mother, too, had smiled faintly when Emily placed warm bread on the table. For a girl who lived on so little, those small comforts meant the world. As she stood at Maple Street, adjusting the wildflowers, Emily couldn't help but wonder if the kind man in the black car would return. She shook the thought away quickly. People like him didn't notice girls like her. Yesterday must have been an act of generosity, nothing more. But then, just as the morning traffic grew heavier, the familiar sleek car slowed down and stopped again. Emily's heart skipped. Daniel stepped out, holding a coffee in one hand. "Good morning," he said with the same gentle smile. "I thought you might need this." He handed her the cup. Emily stared at it, then at him. I can't take this," she whispered. "Of course you can," Daniel replied. "It's just coffee. Everyone deserves a warm drink on a cold morning." Her fingers trembled as she accepted it. The warmth spread through her palms, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a poor street vendor, but as a human being. Over the next few days, Daniel kept returning. Sometimes he bought flowers. Sometimes he simply stopped to chat. He asked her about her day, about her family, about her dreams. At first, Emily answered cautiously, unsure why a wealthy young man would take interest in her. But Daniel's sincerity broke through her walls. Slowly, she began to trust him. One chilly afternoon, as snowflakes started to fall, Emily finally shared her story. She told him about her father's stroke, her mother's illness, and how she had dropped out of school to take care of them. Her voice cracked only once when she admitted, "I just don't want them to feel like a burden. They gave me everything they could." Now it's my turn. Daniel listened quietly, his heart aching. He had grown up with every privilege: private schools, expensive vacations, opportunities laid out like a golden path. But standing there, listening to Emily, he realized she possessed something money could never buy: strength, compassion, and resilience. When she finished, Emily looked away, embarrassed for saying so much. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't mean to trouble you with my problems." Daniel shook his head. "Don't apologize. You've inspired me more than you know." Emily frowned slightly, confused. Inspired? She had never thought of herself as anything but a struggling daughter trying to survive. But the way Daniel's eyes shone, when he looked at her, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, her life carried a meaning beyond hardship. That night, as she walked home with a lighter heart, Daniel sat in his car, determined. He knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just be a passing stranger in her story anymore. Winter settled over Chicago with an unforgiving chill. The streets turned icy, and Emily's thin coat did little to keep her warm. Still, she stood at her usual corner, clutching her basket of flowers. Business was slower now. Fewer people stopped, and most hurried past with their scarves pulled high. Yet she remained. She had to. On one particularly frigid morning, Emily's hands were stiff from the cold. She tried to hold the flowers steady, but her fingers shook uncontrollably. Just then, the familiar black car pulled up again. Daniel stepped out, this time holding a thick woolen scarf and a pair of gloves. "You'll freeze out here," he said gently, wrapping the scarf around her neck before she could protest. Emily's eyes widened. "I can't take this." "You're not taking," Daniel replied firmly. "You're accepting a gift, and everyone deserves kindness." For a moment, Emily felt her throat tighten. People rarely gave without expecting something in return, but Daniel's kindness was pure, and though it made her uneasy, it also warmed a part of her heart that had been cold for too long. From that day forward, Daniel became a constant presence in her life. He stopped by almost every morning, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with food, and always with words of encouragement. He never pushed her, never made her feel small. Instead, he asked about her dreams. One morning, as snow dusted the city, Daniel asked softly, "Emily, if things were different, what would you want for yourself?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I'd go back to school. I loved studying, literature especially, but that feels like another lifetime." Daniel smiled. "You never know. Life has a way of surprising us." Emily looked away, her heart fluttering strangely. She knew better than to dream. Dreams cost nothing, but disappointment cost everything. Still, Daniel's words lingered with her as she walked home that evening. At home, her father noticed the new scarf. His speech was broken, but he managed to say, "Nice and friend?" Emily nodded shyly. "Yes, Papa, just a kind man who buys flowers." Her mother, lying in bed, gave her a faint smile. Sometimes God sends people when we least expect them. The following week, Daniel did something Emily never anticipated. Instead of pulling over for a quick chat, he asked her to join him for lunch at a nearby diner. Emily hesitated. Her dress was worn, her shoes old, and she didn't belong in places like that. But Daniel insisted, his eyes kind and reassuring. Inside the diner, the warmth and smell of fresh coffee felt heavenly. Emily sat nervously across from Daniel, her hands folded tightly. He asked about her favorite books, her favorite colors, even her childhood memories. For the first time in years, Emily laughed, really laughed. When they stepped back onto the snowy street, Emily realized something had changed. Daniel wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was becoming part of her world. And deep inside, though she tried to fight it, Emily felt the first stirrings of something she had never dared hope for: love. The days grew brighter as winter slowly gave way to spring. For Emily, life still wasn't easy, but something inside her had shifted. Daniel's presence gave her strength. And for the first time in years, she felt she wasn't completely alone in her struggles. One Saturday morning, Daniel arrived earlier than usual. Instead of his sleek car, he came on foot, carrying a small paper bag. "I thought we could have breakfast together," he said cheerfully. Emily blinked in surprise. "Here, on the street?" Daniel grinned. "Why not? A street corner can be just as special as any restaurant." They sat on the bench near Maple Street, sharing bagels and orange juice. Emily found herself opening up more than she ever had before. She spoke about how her father used to take her to the park when she was a little girl, how her mother used to sing while cooking, and how everything changed the day illness struck their home. Daniel listened, never interrupting, his gaze steady and full of understanding. "Emily," he said softly, "you've been carrying a weight most people couldn't even imagine. But you've done it with grace. That's rare." Her cheeks flushed. "I don't feel graceful. Most days I feel like I'm drowning." He shook his head. "You're stronger than you realize. And you don't have to do it alone." Emily's heart pounded at those words. She wanted to believe him, but years of hardship had built walls around her hope. Could she really trust someone from a world so different from hers? As spring blossomed, Daniel found more reasons to see her. Sometimes he would help her carry the unsold flowers home. Other times he brought small groceries or medicine for her parents. Emily resisted at first, embarrassed by her dependence, but Daniel's sincerity wore down her defenses. Her parents began to notice the change too. One evening, while Emily was preparing soup, her mother said gently, "That young man cares for you. Emily, I can see it in the way you smile after meeting him." Emily bit her lip, her hands trembling over the pot. "Mama, he's from a different world. He has everything. I have nothing." Her father, from his chair, struggled to form words but managed, "Nothing. Everything." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She knew her parents only wanted her happiness, but the thought of allowing herself to dream felt dangerous. Meanwhile, Daniel's feelings grew stronger each day. At the office, his mind wandered from contracts and meetings to the image of Emily, standing on the street corner, her courage shining brighter than any city light. His friends didn't understand. Some teased him, asking why he spent so much time with a flower girl. But Daniel didn't care. To him, Emily wasn't just a flower girl. She was the most remarkable person he had ever met. And deep inside, he was beginning to realize something undeniable. He was falling in love. Spring painted the city with colors, trees bloomed, the air carried a gentle warmth, and even the busy streets seemed alive with new energy. For Emily, the season brought something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Every morning, Daniel's visits became part of her routine. Sometimes they shared quick conversations, sometimes quiet silences, and sometimes laughter that surprised even Emily. She had grown so used to struggle that she had forgotten what it was like to laugh freely. Daniel had brought that back. But with hope came fear. As she walked home each night, she wondered how long this could last. Was Daniel simply being kind out of pity, or did he really care? The thought of losing this fragile happiness terrified her. One afternoon, as the sky turned golden with the setting sun, Daniel surprised her again. He approached with a bouquet, not the wildflowers she sold, but roses, carefully arranged. "These are for you," he said. Emily froze, staring at the flowers. "For me? But why?" "Because you deserve them," Daniel answered simply. Her chest tightened. No one had ever given her flowers before. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to appear weak. That evening, when she placed the roses in a jar on the small kitchen table, her mother smiled faintly. "He's showing his heart, Emily." Emily shook her head quickly. "No, Mama, he's just being kind. People like him don't fall for girls like me." But her mother's knowing eyes said otherwise. Meanwhile, Daniel wrestled with his own feelings. He had never believed in love at first sight, but with Emily, it wasn't just her beauty that captured him. It was her spirit. He admired how she never complained, how she loved her parents so deeply, and how she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her hardships. She was unlike anyone he had ever met in his privileged world. One night, after a long day at work, Daniel confided in his best friend, Michael. "I think I'm in love with her." Michael nearly choked on his drink. "The flower girl? Daniel, come on! She's sweet, sure, but you're from two different worlds. Your family will never accept this." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I don't care about what the world thinks. I care about her." Michael shook his head, muttering something about Daniel being reckless. But Daniel knew what he felt was real, and nothing, neither friends' doubts nor family expectations, could change that. The next morning, when he saw Emily shivering slightly despite the spring breeze, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would protect her no matter what. And deep inside, Emily began to sense it too, that this was not just kindness. It was something more, something she had been too afraid to name. The weeks passed, and with every encounter, Emily and Daniel's bond grew stronger. For Emily, it felt unreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. She had always believed her life was meant for sacrifice, not love. Yet here was Daniel, showing her that maybe she could have both. One afternoon, Daniel appeared at Maple Street with a determined look. "Emily," he said gently, "can I walk you home today?" Emily hesitated, clutching her basket. No one from outside her small world had ever stepped into it. "It's not much of a place," she whispered. "I don't care about the place," Daniel replied. "I care about you." Something in his voice dissolved her resistance. Quietly, she nodded. The walk to her neighborhood was humbling for Daniel. The streets narrowed, the buildings grew older, and the signs of poverty were everywhere. Yet Emily walked with her head held high, never ashamed of where she lived. When they reached the worn-out apartment building, she opened the door cautiously. Inside, Daniel finally saw the truth of her world. A small, dimly lit apartment with peeling paint and secondhand furniture. Her father sat in a wheelchair, his expression tired but warm. Her mother lay on a thin bed, her hands frail but her eyes bright with love. "Papa, Mama," Emily said softly, her voice tinged with nerves. "This is Daniel. He's a friend." Her father struggled to form words, his speech slow. "Good, man?" he asked with a faint smile. Daniel stepped forward and shook his hand gently. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." Her mother, though weak, studied Daniel with a mother's intuition. She saw the way he looked at Emily, genuine, unwavering. "Thank you for caring," she whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. "It's Emily who takes care of everyone. She's the strongest person I've ever known." Emily busied herself with pouring water, her cheeks flushed. She had never let anyone see this side of her life, and part of her feared Daniel would turn away once he realized how difficult things really were. But Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he stayed for hours, helping Emily prepare soup, reading aloud to her father, and even fixing a broken chair leg in the corner. He fit into their world so naturally it made Emily's heart ache. That night, after Daniel left, her mother whispered, "He loves you." "Emily, I can see it." Emily shook her head quickly. "Mama, don't say that. We're from two different worlds. His family would never allow it." Her mother smiled faintly. "Sometimes love builds a bridge no one expects." Emily lay awake long into the night, her heart torn between fear and hope. She wanted to believe her mother's words, but she also knew that love, in her life, had always come with sacrifice. Meanwhile, Daniel walked home with a new resolve. Seeing her world hadn't scared him. It had strengthened his feelings. And now, more than ever, he knew. He wanted Emily in his life, forever. Daniel couldn't shake the image of Emily's small apartment from his mind. The dim light, the worn-out furniture, her father's weak smile, and her mother's frail hands, it all left a mark on him. He realized how different their worlds were. But instead of discouraging him, it made his feelings stronger. At the office the next morning, Daniel's father, Richard Hayes, noticed his distraction. "You've been daydreaming a lot lately," Richard said sharply. "This isn't the time. We're negotiating $1 million deal, and I need your full attention." Daniel forced a nod, but inside his heart wasn't in real estate. His mind was on a young woman selling flowers on a street corner, doing everything she could to hold her world together. That evening, Daniel visited Emily again. She was surprised to see him, but her eyes lit up despite herself. "You're back so soon?" she asked. "I told you," Daniel said with a smile. "I'm not going anywhere." He stayed until late, helping Emily care for her parents. When he finally left, Emily stood at the doorway, watching him disappear down the street, a strange warmth filling her chest. But not everyone was happy with this growing closeness. Michael, Daniel's best friend, confronted him the next day. "Listen, man, you can't be serious about her. Your family has expectations. She's just not from our world." Daniel's eyes hardened. "Stop calling her just. She's more real than anyone I've ever known." Michael threw up his hands. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when your father finds out." And find out, Richard Hayes eventually did. One evening, he saw his son returning home later than usual, carrying a bunch of wildflowers instead of expensive roses. His suspicion grew. "Who is she?" Richard demanded. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Her name is Emily, and I love her." Richard's face darkened. "Love? With a girl who sells flowers on the street? Do you have any idea how ridiculous that sounds? You're throwing away your future, your family's reputation. For what?" Daniel stood tall. For someone who has more dignity in her heart than all the wealthy people. I know combined. Richard's voice rose. You will end this, Daniel, or you will regret it. But Daniel's answer was steady. I won't, not this time. Meanwhile, Emily had no idea about the storm brewing in Daniel's world. She continued her routine, caring for her parents, selling flowers, and waiting for the quiet moments when Daniel would stop by. Yet deep inside she feared the truth, that a man like him couldn't possibly stay by her side forever. She didn't know it yet, but Daniel was preparing to prove her wrong. The tension between Daniel and his father grew heavier with each passing day. Richard Hayes was a man of influence and wealth, the kind who believed in legacy and appearances. To him, his son's involvement with a poor flower seller was not just unacceptable, it was unthinkable. One evening at the Hayes mansion, Richard sat Daniel down in his study. Son, he said firmly, I've arranged a meeting for you with the daughter of one of our business partners. She's from a respected family. You'll attend dinner tomorrow night. Daniel clenched his fists. I won't, Dad, I've told you already. I'm with Emily. Richard slammed his hand on the desk. Do you hear yourself? Emily has nothing. No wealth, no education, no social standing. She will only drag you down. Daniel's voice trembled, but his conviction was clear. She has everything that matters. She's kind, selfless, strong. She's worth more than all this. He gestured around the grand office. Richard's face reddened with anger. If you choose her, you'll lose everything. Your inheritance, your position in this company, your place in this family. Daniel stood tall. Then so be it. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He knew his father meant every word. Choosing Emily would mean walking away from the comfortable life he had always known. But when he thought about Emily's smile, her strength, and the way she cared for her parents without complaint, his decision felt clear. The next day, Daniel visited Emily. She was surprised to see the heaviness in his eyes. Is something wrong? She asked softly. Daniel hesitated, then took a deep breath. Emily, I need to tell you something. My father doesn't approve of us. He thinks you're not good enough for me. Emily's face fell, her hands tightening around the basket she carried. He's right, she whispered. I'm not good enough. You come from a world I don't belong to. No, Daniel said firmly, stepping closer. You belong in my world because my world is wherever you are. Tears filled Emily's eyes. Daniel, you'll lose everything. I can't let you sacrifice your future for me. Daniel cupped her face gently. Emily, you are my future. None of the rest matters. Her heart ached with a mixture of love and fear. She had spent her whole life sacrificing for others, her parents, her family. Could she allow someone to sacrifice for her? That evening, as Emily sat by her father's side, her mother spoke softly. Child, when a man chooses love over riches, it means his heart is true. Don't push him away. Emily looked at her mother, her chest tightening. Could she really allow herself to believe in love? Even when the odds were against them. Daniel, meanwhile, had already made up his mind. No matter what battles lay ahead, he would fight them. For Emily. Michael stood by the window of the hospital room, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Life had changed so dramatically in such a short span. Just a few weeks ago, he had been a young man burdened by wealth and loneliness. Now he was a husband, a son to two people who were not his by blood, and a guardian of a fragile but beautiful love. Emily was resting on the bed, her eyes closed but her breathing calm. The stress of the past few months had taken its toll, but she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who had survived storms before. Michael admired that about her, her resilience, her grace in the face of hardship. Mrs. Thompson, though frail, had shown remarkable improvement under the care Michael had arranged. A private nurse now visited daily, ensuring her comfort. Mr. Thompson, though still struggling with his health, had found peace in knowing his daughter was no longer burdened alone. Michael often caught himself reflecting on fate. What were the odds that his routine drive past the flower stand would lead to this? A fleeting glance, a moment of curiosity, and then love that would redefine his existence. One evening, as Emily sat beside her mother's bed, Michael joined them with quiet steps. He placed a bouquet of roses, flowers, Emily used to sell on the streets, on the nightstand. Mrs. Thompson smiled weakly, her voice trembling as she said, You know, Emily always believed those flowers carried hope. And now, here you are, bringing that same hope into our lives. Emily's eyes glistened and she reached for Michael's hand. He squeezed it gently, promising silently that he would never let go. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew deeper. Emily no longer carried the weight of survival alone. She found joy in small things: morning walks with Michael, evenings spent talking about dreams they had once buried, laughter that echoed through their modest but warm home. One night, as autumn leaves drifted across the streets, Michael knelt before Emily in the garden where she had planted flowers for her parents. Under the soft glow of the porch light, he pulled out a small velvet box. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but his eyes shimmering with emotion. "The day I met you, I didn't just find love. I found a reason to live with purpose. You've taught me what it means to give, to care, to truly love. Will you marry me?" Emily gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a moment, she was that same girl selling flowers, believing no one would ever look beyond her struggles. And now, here was a man who saw her soul and cherished it. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with joy. 1,000 times yes. As Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, Mrs. Thompson, watching from the window, silently thanked fate. For the first time in years, her daughter was no longer just surviving. She was truly living. The wedding day arrived quietly, without the grandeur of Michael's wealthy world or the extravagance of city elites. Instead, it was a simple ceremony in the small community church. Emily used to pass by every day on her way to sell flowers. The pews were decorated with fresh roses and daisies, flowers that once symbolized her survival, but now stood as emblems of love and new beginnings. Emily wore a modest white dress, the kind she had never imagined she'd own. Her father, though weak, insisted on walking her down the aisle. With each step, tears welled in his eyes, tears of pride, relief, and gratitude. He had worried for so long about leaving his daughter behind in a harsh world, and now he could finally let go of that fear. Michael stood at the altar, his heart pounding with anticipation. The moment Emily appeared, his eyes locked on hers, and everything else faded. He saw not just a beautiful bride, but the girl who had once stood in the cold, clutching flowers in her hands, carrying the weight of her family's survival on her shoulders. And now she was his partner, his equal, his forever. The vows were simple but profound. Michael promised to protect, to cherish, and to stand by Emily through every season of life. Emily promised to love, to trust, and to bring light to their home, no matter how dark the days might be. When they exchanged rings, the small church filled with warmth, a moment that felt more eternal than any fortune could buy. After the ceremony, they returned home, where neighbors gathered to celebrate. It wasn't a lavish reception, but it was filled with music, laughter, and heartfelt blessings. Mrs. Thompson, sitting by the fire, whispered to her husband, "Our daughter's life has finally begun." Months passed, and Michael transformed his life completely. He no longer lived in the cold shadows of his empty wealth. He poured his energy into helping Emily's community, opening small businesses that provided jobs to struggling families. Emily, by his side, started a foundation for street vendors, ensuring that no child or woman had to go hungry while selling flowers or bottles under the harsh sun. Their love story became an inspiration, not because of riches or fairy tale endings, but because it proved that even the smallest gestures, a glance, a bouquet of flowers, could change lives forever. Years later, Michael and Emily would sit with their children in the same garden where he once proposed. Surrounded by blooming roses, they would tell them the story of how love found them when they least expected it. And every time, Emily would smile and say, "I was just a girl selling flowers. And then your father saw me. Not just the flowers, not just the struggle, but me." Michael would kiss her hand and reply, "And I will keep seeing you, Emily, for the rest of my life." In that simple promise, their love remained eternal.